All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show. Tracy, our wonderful podcast, I call her. She calls herself the assistant. I think she is the podcast manager at this point. She makes all these wonderful things happen. I'm really becoming nothing more than a talking head, and I'm not joking. God bless Tracy. I think we're on episode 370, but she did have something come up family-wise today, so without her, I am nothing. So we're deep into the 300s, let's put it that way, and we got a great episode for you guys today. If you're watching live, I can see quite a few of you on already. I knew that you guys would love this topic. We have with us one of our clinical advisors here at FDN. So we wanted to do this episode for a variety of reasons. One, you get to nerd out on labs. That's always fun. We're going to be nerding out on the Dutch test today, which is not an FDN foundational lab, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. But two, I like for you guys to get to meet the clinical advisors because oftentimes, unless you're a graduate of the FDN program, they're almost like these hidden figures in the background that we talk about and we don't have on enough. It's mostly because they're very busy. These people not only do clinical advising for FDN, but every clinical advisor has their own practice. These are people that work with clients all day long. This is their full-time thing, is doing FDN and functional lab analysis and work. So, it's not so easy to always pull them out. So we're really appreciative anytime that they take the time to come on with us. Paula has actually been on one time before where she did a live analysis. Well, it wasn't live at the time. We did a video analysis, but this time it is live. So for those that are on, here's how this will work today. We're going to nerd out. And then about 35 minutes in, if you guys do have any questions, we are happy to answer them. We're not going to go, for 2 hours on this podcast. We're going to do a normal amount of time. So I do not want to waste any more time. We'll get into this. First, I will read Paula's bio for you, for those that don't know her, because again, if you're not an FDN graduate, you might not have heard of Paula. Paula Reed is the founder of Paula Reed Wellness, where the primary focus is optimizing hormones, restoring gut health, and improving detoxification pathways. Paula has helped several hundred women, primarily women, between her private practice and an integrative medical practice, where she was the wellness provider for over 5 years. She is a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and is board certified in functional wellness, holistic health, and functional health coaching. In addition to her private practice, Paula serves as a clinical advisor for FDN, as we talked about. So Paula, welcome back to the show. We appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for having me again.
So let's break down one thing really quick, just so that there's consistency on this show. One thing that we do on Tuesdays on this show, Paula, you might know this, maybe you don't. Lucy McKellar and I, our executive director of AFDNP, we do something called the Lunch and Learn. So the Lunch and Learn is purposely I don't want to say not nerd out, but it is to break down the topics of FDN in a much more simpler way that Lucy and I are fully equipped to do. So we will go over like the foundational labs, and we talked about the stress and hormones profile that we have, which is a salivary only hormone test. So I know any good clinical advisor at FDN understands that there's huge validity to that, but also a lot of graduates, probably including yourself, obviously use the Dutch. So we don't need to spend 30 minutes on this part, but can we just explain really quick why that is a foundational lab in the main course, and then why a lot of graduates do eventually learn to use the Dutch, just so they're not confused as to why we don't teach it in the main course?
Good question. Well, like you said, the saliva course the saliva test has a lot of validity behind it. Absolutely. It's also, quite frankly, a little bit easier to learn, especially when someone is very new to these foundational areas of investigation anyway. The Dutch is also a foundational lab as it's investigating the same areas as the saliva test. It just provides even more information. That's why there's an entire advanced course on stress and hormones that FDN offers that covers this in depth. So a lot of us choose to use this one because we've got the basics down. We want to take it one step further. And especially with someone like me and my population, I work with a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal women. I like to look at how estrogen especially is metabolizing. We're going to touch on that with this lab that we're going to review. So that's one of the reasons a practitioner might choose to do this over the saliva panel.
Yeah, perfect explanation, right? It's like if we actually taught this in the course, since there is a lot more to it, you guys got to understand, not only do we have to take more time, you get charged more. We have to take the time to teach all that. And then the mentoring would be I don't want to call it a nightmare. The mentoring would be interesting if we had to mentor the trainees on the Dutch test. And then the other part that I love that you mentioned is, what population are you working with? Because there is a time and place where this just actually makes sense to integrate into someone's practice. But for myself and my wife, Maddie, well, I'll speak for me just because I've been doing it longer. I've been doing FDN for 8 years. I have almost exclusively used our salivary hormone profiles, not because I don't see validity in the Dutch. It's just because I've never really needed to go there. I have perfect success using the salivary stuff, and it's definitely easier for my clients to understand. But I have found so many of our FDNs, especially the ones that work with women, middle-aged, menopause, whatever it might be, this test is so useful. So that is our little disclaimer here, just to explain why we're showing this to you guys today. I will share Paula's screen here. Well, she's already sharing it. I'm just bringing it on. And I think, guys, this is all right. This is probably going to be our best view that we have of it. If it is troublesome, let us know in the comments. We'll try to adjust. But Paula said she's going to hover her cursor over as she goes along here. So Paula, let's break down the test. And also, of course, let's break down the person that this test is for, because at FDN, we're never treating the paperwork. We're always addressing a person.
Exactly. So this is a new client. As you can tell by the dates, this is a very recent test. She's 43 years old, and her main complaints are moderate fatigue and eczema, which she's been experiencing since around 2020. She's had headaches around ovulation for quite a while now. Just in the last couple of years, she's been experiencing more hair loss. She's also experiencing shorter cycle length, meaning between her monthly cycles, like 23 to 26 days instead of the traditional 28 to 30 days. She's also experiencing more breast tenderness. Now, ironically, this is someone who came to me after watching the last podcast I did with you, Evan, about 1.5 years ago, where I covered the Dutch, because she's been working with another practitioner, not an FDN, a naturopathic doctor, actually, who's done some labs with her. But this was an entire area of investigation that was not done. And after seeing that podcast, she thought, no one's looked at my hormones, not my stress hormones or my sex hormones. So that's why she came to me. And I don't typically do just a one-off test like this, but she has a lot of testing from this other provider over the last year. This was the thing that was missing. So that's why I agreed to do with her. So you want me to start reviewing it now? Is that okay?
Yeah. I was about to say, my heart's broken a little bit. I like to believe that you wanted to hang out with me, but now I understand the real motivation. You're like, this worked great last time.
That was not my motivation, but it did work out that way.
No, but and that's the point, right? We always want everyone who comes on, even our own staff members, to get some benefit from this. So I just think it's cooler that someone's not only listening, but got enough from it that they said, all right, I need to go out with you here. So, all right, thank you for the background on this client. Really love that we have such an up-to-date one. And not that it really matters if you ran it 1 year ago, but there's something just cool about it being so fresh. So yeah, let's dive into it and the different sections.
Okay. So interestingly enough, on this top section here, we see just a summary of the levels of the sex hormones. Now we get into more information on the next couple pages about how these hormones are being used, broken down and eliminated from the body. But in this summary, when we look at these dial gauges, I love the dial gauges on the Dutch because I can see at a quick glance, where are the imbalances? Well, if you notice, there's like a green area between these two yellow stars. This would be the luteal phase of a woman's cycle who's still cycling. And that's when we ask women who are still cycling to do this lab. So we expect to see her primary estrogen, estradiol, and progesterone, both within that luteal phase between the yellow stars. And ideally, when we're looking at the needles on the gauges, we want to see estradiol and progesterone kind of pointing in the same direction. It doesn't have to be spot on perfect, but the needles should be pointing in the same general direction. As you can see at a quick glance, even if you don't understand anything else about this yet, the needles are actually pointing away from each other. Her estradiol is below that star, which indicates the lowest part of the luteal phase, while progesterone is nice and strong within that luteal phase where we would expect to see it. So her estradiol, which is the strongest estrogen, or should be the strongest estrogen, is not where it should be. Now, honestly, for a female who's 43, who's also experiencing some cycle changes, we're going to assume that she may be in an early perimenopausal stage. That is that stage of transition before you get into menopause. Typical average time frame is 5 to 10 years. So she might be in a very earlier stage of that particular phase of her life and her menstrual cycle. And sometimes estradiol gets a little wonky during this time. It can fluctuate month to month, to be perfectly honest. But based on her symptoms, especially with the fatigue, with the headaches, with the hair loss, with the shorter cycles, the shorter time between her menstrual cycles, that kind of tracks with what we're seeing here. She's actually progesterone dominant. Now, there's a lot of talk in the health space. You may see a lot of influencers on social media talking about estrogen dominance as an issue for perimenopausal women. But progesterone dominance is also an issue. This breast tenderness that she's experiencing, the shorter time between her cycles can be a part of this. So we're going to talk more about that in a little bit as to some of the reasons why. But based on some of the labs that she shared with me from the other practitioner, I'll tell you right now, because I'm going to be referencing it a couple of times, she's got a significant issue with mold and mycotoxins. And I don't think that it's necessarily been addressed as sufficiently as it probably could be. And that's one of the things that might be suppressing some of her sex hormone production. Okay, with the estradiol. Sometimes it happens with one of the sex hormones. Sometimes it happens with more than one. But for now, her estradiol is not where we would expect it to be in the luteal phase. Progesterone looks good. Her testosterone here is nice and strong. So that's a good thing. Now, again, we'll talk more about the sex hormones on the next couple pages, but now let's look at her adrenal hormones. We kind of have a little bit of a situation here too. So one of the things that I do like with urine is that we can see both cortisol production, which is evidenced with this right dial gauge where it says metabolized cortisol. This is total cortisol production. This is what the adrenals are capable of producing. Well below range. Again, if you can see where she should be falling within the 2 yellow stars, she's well below it. But if we look at her cortisol availability, which is free cortisol, she's actually not only within range, but she's trending very high within range. In this particular scenario, again, we would prefer to see the needles on both of these gauges kind of pointing in the same direction. They're actually pointing at each other. This is a clearance issue that can evolve into an actual adrenal issue. By clearance issue, I mean she's not clearing the cortisol that she's producing as sufficiently, efficiently, and quickly as she should be. It's hanging around in her body. So that leaves her with sufficient cortisol to get through the day, but now her adrenals have slowed down production to where they're barely producing any. Now, when we see a discordant pattern like this, the two biggest reasons are less than stellar thyroid function, because our thyroid gland controls our metabolism and our energy. And she certainly has some symptoms like that moderate fatigue that might also correlate with a thyroid issue. So I've advised her to get a full thyroid panel so we can check that. But we're going to get some other clues on the next couple pages of this Dutch where she has very, very sluggish liver clearance. So that's one of the issues that's lending to this discordant pattern, if that makes sense. And then the free cortisol, which is the free and bound cortisol that's available to be used, is then graphed on this daily free cortisol pattern. Overall, the pattern looks appropriate. It's just very extreme in the first half of the day because she has so much cortisol to work with. And then it's much lower in the evening, which is okay because we don't want high cortisol in the evening. That can impair our sleep quality. So overall, the pattern looks okay. But this is a discordant pattern that needs to be addressed. This is a clearance issue that's also now evolved into an adrenal issue, but we have to address the clearance issue first. Okay. And then we also look at DHEA. Her DHEA production is in line with her age. It's broken down by the decades here. And as you can see, her total DHEA production is in line. This is a precursor hormone to both testosterone and estradiol. But it's also a counter-regulatory hormone to cortisol, meaning cortisol can become catabolic when it's too high. So we want sufficient DHEA so that our body is in a more anabolic building state rather than a catabolic, which is a breaking down state. So from a production standpoint, she's anabolic. From an availability standpoint, she's a little bit anabolic. But again, we're going to work on that clearance issue, and that's going to help bring a little bit better balance there. So anything quick before I move on to the next page, Evan?
I mean, I could comment on a few things, but the clearance thing would be one of a few examples, many actually, that would be different from like a salivary hormone panel to the ones that we run. We're not able to see stuff like that per se. So I think this is kind of an interesting and unique thing that we're able to see on the Dutch, and it's one of the reasons some FDNs will use it.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. Now, this page looks really busy because it's a lot of the hormone metabolites. It's a lot easier to look at this information on the next page. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to that page because it breaks down all of those hormone metabolites into dial gauges again. I love the dial gauges. I love the slider bars because, again, at a quick glance, I can kind of get a picture of what's going on here. I'm going to start in the upper left corner here where we're looking at androgens because this gives us one clue about liver clearance already. So, pregnenolone is the master hormone, metabolizes into both DHEA and testosterone, as well as our primary androgens. In an ideal scenario, we want to see DHEAS, which is the sulfated DHEA. This is what matches the free cortisol on the first page. This is the usable form of DHEA. It's within a good range, but ideally we want to see the needle on this gauge match the sum of these two gauges down here. The etiocalanolone and androsterone are the two primary androgens. Now, these two androgens don't always match, and that's okay. This is just showing how the body is choosing to metabolize androgens down the less androgenic pathway, which is the 5B, or the more androgenic pathway, which is 5A. This is important information for us because anyone, women and men, who metabolize more strongly down the 5A sometimes have those symptoms of higher androgens like acne, oily skin, hair loss in the front of the head, irritability, aggressiveness, that kind of thing. So it's always a good idea to look at how is the body choosing to metabolize these androgens. Hers is more 5B, which is good, but that's why like one of these androgens may look stronger than the other, and that's okay. But this DHEAS needle on the gauge would likely be a little bit lower if it were actually showing the sum between these two. The fact that it's a little higher, we call that upregulation of sulfation. Sulfation is one of the phase 2 liver detox pathways. So this gives us a clue where there may be a backup in the exit ramp, if you will, for sulfation. When our body is done using hormones, they're all going to metabolize down a variety of these phase 2 liver detox pathways. So we have sulfation, methylation, glucuronidation. So we know that there's an issue with sulfation here. And it just so happens because I know of what her labs look like with the other practitioner and the mold and mycotoxins she's dealing with. This is one of the pathways that those mycotoxins also eliminate. She's got a pretty significant issue there. So there looks to be a backup in the pathway, if you will. So we know we need to support the liver because of that, okay? Now I'm gonna hop over to the progesterone side. In urine, we can't measure total progesterone directly. So we measure these two metabolites, the B-pregnanidiol and A-pregnanidiol, and these two give us the total. We don't see the total on this page. It was on the first page, but this just tells us how she's metabolizing progesterone, which is fine. Now, when we come down and look at the estrogens, this is where it might get a little confusing. I'm not going to go overboard with explanation here, but just break it down a little bit. When we talk about estrogen in women, there's actually 3 estrogens. So we have estrone, estradiol, estriol. We can measure all 3 with urine. And it's all about the balance and the stage of life that a woman is in as to where these needles should be on the gauge. Again, with her estrone and estradiol, we would expect her to be in the luteal phase, and she's not showing that. Estriol is actually the weakest estrogen, except for women who are pregnant, because estriol is actually created in the placenta during pregnancy. She's definitely not pregnant. I've ruled that out. So sometimes when estriol is elevated, it's due to gut inflammation, which I know she has because of the mycotoxin issue that she's dealing with. There is likely a mold colonization going on in the gut. But that's not the only reason her estriol is showing higher. We can also see how all of these estrogens are metabolized, detoxed, and eliminated in the body. And we look at an example of how her body is detoxing estrone with these 3 colored arrows. And you may notice, looking at the needles on the gauges, her 16-OH, which is the one shown in blue here, the top one, is higher than the other two dial gauges showing how her body is metabolizing estrogen. Well, you may notice that between 16-OH and estriol, it's like a two-way street because we see arrows pointing in both directions. Estriol can only metabolize down the 16-OH pathways it's eliminating from the body. But if someone is metabolizing too many estrogens in total down this 16-OH pathway, it also pushes up to estriol. So this creates a little bit of inflammation in the body. And when we look at her total phase 1 estrogen metabolism, this pie chart is representing a phase 1 liver detox pathway called hydroxylation. And this is where the body is preparing to eliminate estrogen and other used hormones. We're just not eliminating them yet. And it's how we metabolize these hormones that can determine some health issues potentially within our body. This is one of the primary reasons I use the Dutch in my practice because, again, I'm working with a lot of women in a stage of life where they may start considering bioidentical hormone use to support hormones. And I want to make sure personally that a woman is metabolizing her hormones appropriately before even considering supporting those hormones. This is a perfect example of why. When we look at this pie chart and we look at how these pathways are kind of color coded here, the 2-OH pathway, which is evidenced in green, is the most protective pathway. We want most of our estrogen metabolizing down this pathway. It's health protective. Expected percentages, 60 to 80%. This is a range assigned by Precision Analytical based on the tens of thousands of Dutch labs that have been done. This is expected, but the higher the better. The more estrogen we send down this pathway, the most protective of our health. She's actually below the expected percentage at 51.4. And that is because I'm going to jump over to the 16-OH to the far right in blue here. She's sending way too much down that pathway because of this estriol being elevated and because of her body via genetics, diet, some lifestyle issues. She's metabolizing more down that pathway than what we would like to see. So that has caused the 16-OH pathway to show higher in range than what is considered ideal. Precision Analytical says 13 to 30%. I like to see it like 10 to 20%, just based on my work with this. Now, the 16-OH pathway is not a pathway that can like create cancer, but it does promote growth. Whether it's cancer, whether it's other tissues in the body, like women who have fibrocystic breasts or fibroids or polyps or endometriosis, any issues within the uterus or the ovaries, like ovarian cysts, any kind of abnormal tissue that we don't want to see growing, when the 16-OH is higher, it can promote that kind of growth. So it's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears with that 16-OH. We don't want too little because we want a little bit metabolizing down that pathway. It may help protect against osteopenia and osteoporosis. Too much is like throwing gasoline on a forest fire, but having just the right amount is what is perfect. This is a little too high. And then the 4-OH, which is represented in red, that's the ugly pathway. That's the one that can literally contribute to cancer-causing quinones, which damage DNA, and this can be the start of like a cancering process. So that's why we look at that. Hers is considered poor. This phase 1 is poor because the 2-OH is not high enough. The 4-OH is a little higher than we want to see. And the 16-OH is definitely way too high. And we have strategies to address that, okay? Now, in phase 2, then, that's represented at the bottom of this page. This is where we're actually eliminating it. And as we can see, her methylation activity is extremely low. It's only at 3%. We want to see that at 50% or higher. This is proper hormone elimination. In a case like this, hormones are being recirculated, and that can be problematic. So this is just one methylation pathway in the body, but this is where all of these hormones get eliminated. This poor methylation and the poor sulfation that we saw up above are two of the reasons that she's got sluggish liver clearance, and that can be contributing to that poor cortisol clearance that we saw on the first page as well. Any questions before I move on, Evan?
No, I'm always just Whenever I hear you do this stuff, I'm always like amazed, and it makes me, I get like inclined to go do the Dutch myself. Then but I'm like, well, I can tell. Like, all jokes aside, I can tell why this is not something that we teach as a foundational. This is a. I'm very familiar with the salivary hormone tests, and I could explain it very well. But this is just a different set of stuff, and it's a different level. Someone did ask. Melissa said, "Can I get the name of your practice? It's not listed on the screen." Melissa, we will share it at the end as well, but I'll put it on for you right now. It is paulareedwellness.com. I think that is a great sign if that's the first question.
Thank you.
Very cool. But no, I have no other questions at this exact time. I will say that we have 30 of you live, which is so cool. I'm glad that you guys have chosen to spend your Monday doing this with us. That's very fun. If you do have any questions about the test or for Paula, this would be the time to ask them, though. I would always rather prioritize your questions over mine. So we're good for right now, though, Paula.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to move on. Now, this page, again, is just kind of breaking down a lot of the metabolites of cortisol, cortisone, and we measure creatinine. I do like to point this out up at the top because these are what we use to determine that the person who did the test was neither too dehydrated or too overhydrated. There are some very specific instructions when someone does the touch test, since it is using urine at 4 points throughout the day, just like the salivary panel. We do have some restrictions on like how much water you can consume during the testing time so that we can measure the hormones most appropriately. So I do always double check this to make sure that these are accurate, because if they're not, we can adjust a little bit if we need to. But in this case, she followed the instructions. She was neither dehydrated or overhydrated, so that's good. Now, looking at this page, some of it is repeat and some of it is new. At the very top, we do measure melatonin. This actually gives us a window into gut function, and her melatonin is miserably low. It is below range. So that is another clue that we know there's some more work to be done in her gut. I know that some has been done with a previous practitioner, but we're going to talk through a whole protocol because that wasn't even really sufficiently addressed. And that's something that can impact melatonin production, because 75% of our melatonin production does occur in the gut. So when there's an issue there, we're going to see that become an issue. Now, the total DHEA and total cortisol is just a carryover from the first page to remind us of what those look like. But we also get a slider bar that tells us what the systemic preference is. Our bodies are pretty smart. So our bodies will naturally say, hey, preserve cortisol because you're in a significant state of inflammation, and we want to preserve cortisol since cortisol is anti-inflammatory. Preserve it, preserve it. Or sometimes the body will have a cortisone preference. Now, cortisone is the inactive form of cortisol, and our bodies will metabolize and convert back and forth between cortisol and cortisone as the body feels that it's needed. But ironically, when someone is going through a lot of emotional stress, there can be a systemic preference for cortisone. But then we also look at what have the kidneys actually eliminated. Again, with saliva, we can look at both free cortisol and free cortisone. That's the dial gauge to the left here, because sometimes when there is a systemic preference for cortisone, we may see too much deactivation of cortisol to cortisone. But in this particular case, her body is holding on to cortisol like crazy. Even though she has a systemic preference, her body may be trying to protect her from this going any higher, but her cortisone is less than cortisol. So we don't need to do anything specific there from like a supplement strategy or anything, but I just wanted to point out why we measure those two things. And then on the last page, we have a little mini organic acids test. And most of these markers are used because they may correlate with other sections of the lab to provide a little bit more guidance or understanding. So we do have the vitamin B12 and vitamin B6 markers, as well as biotin. That's also a B vitamin. If someone is showing poor methylation, for example, sometimes we'll see these out of range. Now, I'm just going to be brutally honest, as much as I love the Dutch test, when we look at these organic acid markers, these are not the end all be all way of actually measuring B vitamins. Okay. Looking at blood with both extracellular and intracellular is going to be the most accurate. But if something's really, really, really out of range, it often will show up with these organic acid markers. These are showing within range. range. The glutathione marker, that's your master antioxidant. It is showing within range as far as production. We do have an indican marker, which is used on one of our other foundational labs as well to look at the potential for dysbiosis or any putrefaction of protein in the gut. Hers is showing within range here. Now with the neuro-related markers, we have the dopamine and norepinephrine, which are neurotransmitters. The HVA, which is the dopamine metabolite, is showing in the lower end of range, not out of range, but lower end of range. This primarily correlates with the fact that she has pretty significant HPA axis dysfunction because her metabolized cortisol is in the tank with her available cortisol so high. But this is a very common thing to see when cortisol production is very, very low. This neuroinflammation marker is within range. I'm very happy to see that, especially given the fact that I know she has mycotoxins. And sometimes when someone has a significant issue with mycotoxins, we'll see that a little elevated. But in her case, it's not. Her melatonin, again, is very low, which kind of points to the potential of stuff still going on in her gut. And really, really happy to see this oxidative stress marker, the 8-OHDG, well within range, nice and low. I say that because of when I pointed out how poor that estrogen metabolism was, and the fact that she's not really eliminating it properly. This could have been problematic if this were elevated. You know, this would be a situation where I would say, has she had a mammogram? Is she getting her normal GYN checkups just to make sure nothing ugly is brewing there? But in this case, it's nice and low, so I feel a lot better about that. We've got a lot of time to work on some of that estrogen metabolism issues to make it look a heck of a lot better than what it does today. So these are the 6 pages of the Dutch of the actual lab results. That's all I'm sharing here. What other questions might you have?
Yeah, definitely have some stuff here. So one, no worries to this person that just asked, because I should have been more specific, but we will ask this question. But just to be clear, the questions that we are going to be prioritizing today would be ones ideally about the Dutch or hormones, guys. So this person had asked, hi, Paula, I'm very conscious about keeping toxins out. Let me share it, actually. Here you go. I'm very conscious about keeping toxins out of my body and maintaining a clean environment. Yet I found out that my mercury levels are high. What are your thoughts on this? And Paula, it's up to you, actually, whether or not you want to humor this. Again, no fault to the person who I asked this. What's your name? Oh, My Holistic Health. Just not fully relevant to the test we're on right now. So do you want to even go down this route, Paula, or?
I mean, I would just say, good thing about wanting to keep toxins out of your body. I absolutely agree with that, and have them as low as possible. You know, at the same time, if there's any issue with something like metals, then you have to consider the big picture. So you might want to consider further investigation to see if there are other metals or toxins, mycotoxins, environmental toxins, things that can be adding to that. And then there are some great comprehensive approaches to address all the things.
Thank you, Paula. Christy, hello. Welcome to the show. Can supplementing with melatonin and having a very high level, 6,401, make the oxidative stress number false, 1.04? I'm just reading those out for those that might choose to listen to this on audio, although I hope they click on the video.
Yeah. So having very high melatonin levels correlates with when you are supplementing, like between 4,000 and 6,000 of that melatonin is very common if someone is doing anywhere between, say, 1 to 3 milligrams of melatonin. It's a first pass metabolism that we see in the urine. It doesn't mean that the levels are truly too high. It's just what we're seeing eliminate in the urine because it was taken during the testing window. But as far as it making the oxidative stress number false, no, it should not have any impact on that whatsoever.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy. While we wait for other questions to come through, hopefully there are plenty. I have some myself. So one thing that I'm already thinking, because I know who's going to click on this, we're going to have plenty of people that are not FDNs and want to listen to this because they like functional lab testing. That's awesome. We're also going to have grads that got this email, and they're fresh grads, right? And we know that's like, we love you guys, but that's like one of the most dangerous spots to be, because you just finished this training, you paid for it, you got this wonderful education. We allowed you to graduate because we know that you're ready to do the work that you were taught in the course. And then you get into the graduate group and you're like, holy cow, there are some super sharp cookies in there. And there really are. I mean, they're some of the smartest people I've ever met. It is really awesome to get to learn from these individuals. But We need to learn how to balance these things. So my question for you, Paula, is for someone that saw this test today and is like, oh my God, they get that mindset of, I don't know enough, I need to do more. We both probably could agree, day one of graduating, no, you don't need to implement the Dutch into your practice. You need to go do what you know, and you can start studying though. Now, similarly, as someone who's been doing this for 8 years, that's definitely overkill. If I wanted to have implemented the Dutch by now, I certainly could have done that. So my question is, how would someone know when they're ready, I guess, to implement one of these types of labs, either as a supplemental lab or as even a replacement or swap out foundational, I'll call it, to a salivary hormone test? When would you say an FDN's ready for that?
That can really vary by the individual. A lot of times, like you said, and I agree wholeheartedly, Evan, what knowledge you have when you graduate is enough to do the work that you've been taught to do. Sometimes it does depend on the population. Like I said, I work with a lot of women who are interested in hormone therapy, or they're already on hormone therapy and their doctors are not doing this kind of testing, and they're concerned about breast cancer, which is certainly understandable. There's a lot of information that can just scare the living daylights out of you when you start searching things. So it may depend on the population. Like I really do believe that if you're working with women on hormone therapy, this is a must-have lab, because it's one of the few where you can see how the body is metabolizing estrogen, as an example. But if you're not doing that kind of work, there's so much valuable information that you get with the saliva hormone panel that may be enough for you. Sometimes folks are just like, okay, I'm doing this, I feel very comfortable with it. But I think as practitioners, to be good practitioners, it's never a bad idea to continue your education, learn new things. That doesn't mean you have to adopt every lab that you study. Even I, throughout the years, I've tried different things, tried it out for a couple of years and said, okay, I don't really need that, but I tried it. It's okay to do that. It's okay to evolve and say, I want to learn something even more difficult or next level or whatever. Some people do it with organic acids testing or HTMA or, mold and mycotoxin testing, whatever. So it's when you feel you're ready, because you want to take it to the next level, because you just want to learn something new. Whether you ever incorporate that lab into your practice or not is entirely up to you. But, it's education.
Great answer. I always say this too on the show. I constantly remind people of this. And if you're listening for the first time, it's a good thing to hear. How many times do we get the question, what's the best lab? What's the best lab? What's the best lab for this? The best lab is not actually the one that has the best technology. And you say, well, the heck do you mean by that? Of course, literally the best technology would be the best lab. I get that. But the best lab for your client is the one that you know how to look at and actually get some useful information from. If I ran a Dutch tomorrow, admittedly, I have some information just getting it from osmosis, being around other FDNs or like something from Paula. And yes, I could go to the clinical advisors, but I actually might end up serving my clients at a lower level just because I haven't done the research I need to do yet to fully understand what I'm looking at. So yes, literally the best test is the one with the best technology, but the one that's best for your client is the one that you know how to use. So you start with the foundationals. If you go through FDN, if you're not an FDN, you don't even necessarily need to listen to this. I just always hope that you're doing the right thing and actually have training to some degree on the things that you are using. So thank you for that. We got some other questions flying in. Holly. Hello, Holly. Thank you. Holly said this client had low methylation. So the test we just saw, yes, she had low methylation. What would the opposite indicate if they had high methylation?
Good question. So strong methylation is what is preferable. That means that your body is doing what it's supposed to be doing appropriately and eliminating those hormones efficiently. Now, there's also something known as over methylation. And that's often due to, number one reason could be the body trying to take care of itself. Like sometimes you'll see over methylation with the exact opposite of what we saw with this client, where there's really, really, really high levels of estrogen. Like the body will start over methylating, trying to clear that. So that's one example. Or sometimes when people are doing very specific methylation support, like maybe they know they have the MTHFR gene mutation and they're supporting methylation pathways, sometimes we'll see a little bit higher methylation because of that support.
Awesome. Thank you. I will say this, but we're going through a Q&A, so just in case people want to hop off, Paula, where can they find you? I'll share it on the screen, but again, for our audio listeners, if you could just say the places you'd like them to find you, that's very helpful for us.
Well, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Paula Reed Wellness. And then my website is paulareedwellness.com. Keep it simple.
Very cool. Thank you. And guys, by the way, if you're interested, like, okay, wait, could I go and do something like Paula and Ev? Like, how could I actually do this stuff? We do have a bunch of resources that we offer at FDN. We try not to make this a pitchy or an advertisement heavy podcast, but one of the things that you can go to is fdntraining.com/resources. One of the resources there is it actually lets you start the FDN course for free. Listen, you only get to do so much of it, but what I found is it's one of the more popular resources because it allows people to truly get to kind of see what the course is and isn't, and make a decision as to whether or not it's something that they wanted to do. So this is truly free. It's not input your credit card and we charge you in 7 days, and then it's very hard to cancel. There's no credit card at all. We just want you to check it out if you're interested. So if you're looking to work with someone like Paula, go to Paula Reed Wellness. If you're wondering, wait, how could I go and do stuff like this? Check us out at fdntraining.com/resources. Okay, here we go. Keep moving along with some questions. Holly again. How accurate is the glutathione marker on the Dutch? And even if it is in range, would you still recommend supplementation if they are dealing with sluggish detox pathways?
Another great question. So sometimes I would recommend it. It depends on the complete big picture. This is only one marker for glutathione, which is actually showing production. When people do a full organic acids test, they'll often also see the markers that show what is your need as opposed to your production. So even though you may have sufficient glutathione production, your need may be greater. In this particular case, I don't see a need for glutathione for her, but just general liver support for phase 2 liver detox pathways.
Mm-hmm. And Julie, I'm about to go to your question. I'm just jumping to Christy because Christy was very tactful here. This isn't a question. It's very funnily worded. I am sure you guys are going to go over how to optimize for this client and how to support estrogen pathways. Thanks. Love you guys. Yes, we are. It's going to be my final question. So I was about to say, we still need to think about how to work with these results from an FDN perspective. That's like our secret sauce. Anyone can run the labs in a sense. I mean, not sometimes you can't run the labs, but you can find a way to get the labs if you have a will, but you need to figure out the philosophy behind what you're looking at and how to optimize for the client themselves. So we will get to that, Christy. Julie first. Julie had asked, what would your thoughts be if a client's estradiol is stating estrogen dominant on a SHP, but on the Dutch it shows extremely low estradiol? Can it change that drastically each month? Okay, so it sounds like these tests were at least done a month apart. Let's just assume it's 1 month apart. Could it change that drastically?
It's possible. It is very possible. Also, timing of testing with cycling women is extremely important. And especially if someone's cycles are not spot on perfect, it may just be that the testing window was not appropriate with one of these labs.
Julie, I don't know. I mean, this would unfortunately be out of your own pocket, I suppose. But if you are using these tests with clients, like both of them, that is, if you ever run one at the same time and you want to come on and share the results, let us know. I would be happy to look at that with you. No problems and no secrets here. Okay, Christy, to your point, we will get to this part now. So what I had for you, Paula, that I wanted to kind of finish with is these results are great. And it was actually hilarious because you didn't do this to be funny, I don't think, but it was funny. You had the one page where you're like, oh, there's a lot going on here. And then you went to the dials and I'm like, as if there's not a lot. It almost did better when it was just words and numbers than the dial. But the point is, though, it's very fun to dive into these tests for people like us. It really is. Like, it's a recreational thing almost. And I think some of us can get so locked into the tests that it's easy to get separated from why we're actually doing these. Now, I know clinical advisors don't have that problem, or at least you guys are constantly keeping yourself in check. So when you get this many results, if you went to a functional medicine doctor, not all, but some, or other functional practitioners, they treat the paperwork often. They're going to say it's a supplement for this, it's this for that, and not necessarily look at the whole person. And I heard you mention the mold colonization potential in the gut and so many other things. So where do you draw the line and how do you start with a client like this so that you're not just treating a million things off the paperwork, but also using the test results at the same time? Like, how do we figure this out?
Yeah. And in this case, it even is a little bit stickier for me because I didn't run the original labs. They were run with another practitioner, and she told me what her protocols were. And I mean, not to be harsh, but I just don't feel like some things were addressed exactly the way I would have. So, we talked through that, but with her, I think she's looking for, should I be doing something like to support my estradiol, her estrogen, because it's so low? And I think she should, but not with a direct hormone at her age. There's a reason that her estradiol is low. It's because her cortisol production is so low. Like, the body will prioritize survival over fertility. And right now her adrenals are in the tank based on a variety of things. So, like, for this particular client, my number one priority is liver support. There's a really, really great supplement from Seeking Health called Liver Nutrients that supports every phase 2 liver detox pathway. And I love it because it's easy peasy simple. It's one capsule a day, along with all the dietary lifestyle stuff. She's already incorporating everything that I would suggest when it comes to diet, and most of the lifestyle as well. There's just some fine tuning to be done here because the mold colonization needs to be addressed. So really working on the gut, supporting liver. And then I really, really want to help her with those estrogen metabolism pathways. From the diet standpoint, I always advise eating cruciferous vegetables daily, dark leafy greens, raspberries, raw carrots, flaxseed. But then there's a great product called sulforaphane, which is the extract of cruciferous vegetables to the nth degree, very concentrated. And my suggestion would be that she should continue with that until her next Dutch. I want to do another one in 6 months because we want to make sure that all the strategies that we're doing to support the entire body are working.
Paula, one of the things that I track every time is I see, how many of the people that are watching our episodes are subscribers, how many are new listeners. And it's a blessing. Like, every time we have a substantial amount of new people tuning in for the first time. So shameless plug, if you guys like this type of content, please do subscribe to the channel. We release 4 podcasts a week now. 3 new ones on the YouTube. On the audio, we have 4 a week. So we have content like this. It's really fun, and we love engaging with you guys and getting questions answered every time. So definitely subscribe. But also, again, for someone that might be listening for the first time and they're trying to understand this balance that we have as FDN. So wait, you guys get super technical and nerdy with this lab, but at the same time, we're talking about carrots and we're focusing on the lifestyle. Like, can you just do the lifestyle? Do you need the labs? Like, I think they kind of wonder. And sometimes I even think about this and reflect on it. Like, what percentage does each category, labs versus lifestyle, hold weight in the success for these clients? So I know it might be hard to quantify something like this. This is just an opinion or a guess. Like, let's say your client here that you're working with only was able to afford the lifestyle stuff versus she's now able to do these tests and is able to do the Dutch. Like, how much better off is she percentage-wise? Would she have gotten to the same point eventually just doing the lifestyle stuff? What's your opinion on that?
Well, in this particular case, that's a great question because she came to me like 6 months after finishing the last lab with a previous practitioner and doing all the lifestyle stuff. She really does. I mean, I looked at her food journals for 3 days. She's eating spot on. She's moving her body appropriately. She's sleeping. She's doing the things that we consider, the DRES part of dress. But in this particular case, I think we really needed this data to know how to be even more strategic. I mean, otherwise, any health coach who's just recommending proper diet, proper hydration, getting enough sleep would be helping everybody. But, I remember, I think this tagline is still used, test, don't guess. This is where it comes in handy and is perfectly displayed. We have some very specific clues. So even with our diet and lifestyle strategies, we can make it a little more specific based on how she's presenting, because we've also correlated that with, it explains why she's feeling the way she does.
Okay. So yeah, important. Like, listen, if you guys are out there suffering and you're out of money, do the lifestyle stuff and keep doing it. It's not going to change everything overnight, but you do want to add these tools on when you can. My life has clearly, not even a question, been better off because I had access to these labs, but I also started this stuff at 21 and I was sick prior to that. So I wasn't able to kind of go get these high level degrees or have a high paying job right out of high school or something like that. So I understand what it's like to spend $300 on these tests and I only made $300 that week, right? That math doesn't work very well. So there is a balance here. But if you can do this stuff, man, it's hard to say someone wouldn't be better off. So we're just about at our 50-minute mark. I feel like I got multiple hours worth of value in under 60 minutes. So that's amazing. If you guys don't mind, could you please just drop a thank you in the chat for Paula if you liked this today? You have to understand, yes, she's a staff member, but this is more of a goodwill type of project when they come on the podcast and help us out and share this knowledge that they've spent tens of thousands of dollars accumulating, and God knows how many hours you've spent studying this stuff and being involved with these types of labs. So if we could just drop a thank you in the chat, we'd really appreciate that. And Paula, you've officially sparked this idea in my mind. This truly happened live, where Lucy and I typically do lunch and learns. But I'm thinking, okay, there's 30 people on live today. That's great, especially since we were off last week because I was on vacation. You haven't been on in a while, and you got results last time, right? It was worth your time. You get a client that's happy to work with you. They're better off because of it. I'm like, should we make some of our lunch and learns lab and learns, and then we can keep bringing different people on to nerd out on this stuff. So also let me know in the chat if you guys would be interested in having some lunch and learns turn into lab and learns, and maybe we can work out a deal where we make this more regular with some of our clinical advisors. So let us know in the chat, because it's all based on feedback that you guys give. I see a lot of thank yous coming in, and Paula, I would like to thank you on behalf of FDN, which you're also a part of. So, on behalf of my podcast rating, let's put it that way. My podcast stats just went up because of you. So that I appreciate.
Well, thank you, Ev. I really enjoy doing this with you. I'd love to do it again. And I think you've got a great idea on the whole lunch and learn, lab and learn, whatever you want to call it. I think it'd be fun. Sweet. So, yeah.
Final plug today, guys, is I get to meet Paula in person for the first time in just about a week and change here. And if you're like, how the heck could I meet Paula? You go to hicks-live.com. We still actually have some tickets for that. And I was told by Jeremy, who is running the conference, that you can't get the original discount that we had as FDNs, but they did decide to do $150 off for the remainder of the time. So if there's any tickets left, the conference is on the 16th the 17th of October. So make sure you get in. It's hicks-live.com, code FDN150 at checkout. I just got the updated numbers today, October 7th. We are at over 70 FDNs in attendance, 17 of which are staff members. So literally since 2019, when we did our last in-person conference, there has never been a better opportunity to really come meet FDNs, see what we're about. Worst case scenario is you get to go to an awesome conference and network with people and learn some stuff. Best case is maybe you get to figure out if this is the next path for you. So hicks-live.com, code FDN150 at checkout. And Paula, I will